Hello. In the environmental agenda, the issue of associated petroleum gas utilization linked to carbon emissions remains traditionally relevant. This problem, which we have repeatedly examined before, continues to be pressing and provides new reasons for analysis. Our conversation today is with Alexey Knizhnikov, an expert on corporate environmental responsibility, about all this and the changes that have occurred over the past year. Hello, Alexey. Hello. I would like to start by clarifying the background situation. Alexey Yuryevich, in your opinion, does the environmental issue maintain its priority in the current complex economic and budgetary situation, at least at the level it was previously given? Your opinion. It definitely maintains its priority at the level of state policy. As an example, I can mention that over the past year, a new environmental program was adopted, called Environmental Well-Being, and the state is allocating even more funds to various areas. This includes the creation of protected areas and the protection of endangered species. However, unfortunately, the topic we will discuss today has not been prioritized in this program, although it must be said that air pollution issues are also being addressed significantly at the level of state policy by a separate company. For example, I can mention the well-known atmospheric polluter in the Arctic region, the company Norilsk Nickel, which has made a colossal step in reducing emissions over the past year. In terms of volume, it's usually about 400,000 pollutants, which is about a 25% reduction. This is a unique example. Moreover, it's an example where the company, investing its own funds, implemented new equipment and switched to a new technology. But unfortunately, what we will discuss seems to require some new approaches to follow the course that our leading companies demonstrate in real emission reductions. The World Bank has once again published a report stating the worsening situation related to flaring in many countries around the world. And this is happening, as you said, despite the fact that the environmental agenda remains one of the priority topics globally. In your opinion, what is the reason for such complexity in solving this problem? Indeed, the latest World Bank report highlights negative trends annually. And I would like to elaborate on this. Unfortunately, the negative trends are not only in the growth of the absolute volume of flaring according to the World Bank's Global Monitoring Program. Globally, about 151 billion cubic meters of gas are flared. Again, to give our listeners an idea of the scale of the problem, this is roughly the amount of gas used by the entire African continent to solve its energy problems. On an annual scale. Yes, on an annual scale. And this is, of course, absolute growth, which is bad, but what might be even worse is the relative growth. It turns out that despite statements at various levels, both national and corporate and globally, that energy efficiency is the driver of progress. The oil industry in many countries shows the opposite trend, meaning the amount of flared associated gas per ton of oil produced is increasing. In this regard, not only our country, so this is an increase in intensity. Yes, an increase in intensity. For our country, this is also a fact, at least according to the World Bank. They register an increase in flaring, while at the same time, according to their data, there has been a decrease of about 4% in production, which overall shows that the specific indicators have increased. But many other countries, including leading ones like the USA, also show, and the reasons are different, right? In each country, there is some unique set of reasons. Or are there still some common factors influencing this situation? Well, the reasons are different on one hand, but on the other hand, the World Bank highlights one of the main reasons, which is that both governments and companies, for various reasons, lower the priority level of solving this problem. Because the main message we all need to understand is that both technologically and financially, the problem of associated gas flaring can actually be solved, and many countries that show positive results prove this. Moreover, if we talk about numbers again, we mentioned the absolute flaring figures, but if we translate this into greenhouse gas emissions, which can also be assessed in monetary terms according to the World Bank, this volume of flared associated gas leads to emissions of about 400 million tons of greenhouse gases, CO2 and methane. If we talk about the lost revenue, let's recall the famous phrase of our compatriot Dmitry Mendeleev, who said that burning oil is like burning banknotes, but at least when burning, there is some product. Here we are burning a valuable resource and essentially doing so. According to the World Bank, the value of this resource, if used, is about $60 billion. In the World Bank report, Russia is again named among the countries most abusing flaring, in a country where, so to speak, the previous trend has only intensified. In connection with this, continuing your thought, perhaps there is a lack of economic motivation for businesses to produce. Yes, I want to say that. Of course, well, the conditions we live in now, and we perfectly understand the external pressure factor, the context, of course, it's clear that now there is a regime, let's say, of saving for oil companies. And on the other hand, a reduction in pressure from our regulators is understandable, obvious. To keep the economy surviving, something has to be sacrificed. But therefore, the Russian context is specific. But the problem is that, unfortunately, many large producing countries, the World Bank highlights 9 major players who have contributed. 75% of flaring is done by 9 countries. And among them are not only Russia, Iran and Iraq, but also the United States, Mexico, and a number of others, Venezuela, a whole list. So, returning to Russia, there is a noted trend that 40% of the country's total flaring now occurs in eastern Siberia. This has never happened before. This indicates that we are now seeing intensive development of eastern Siberia, the exploration of new sites. And as it was once in western Siberia, the infrastructure necessary for processing and using associated gas is lagging behind. This is probably the main reason, isn't it? I think so. The lag in infrastructure development from the exploration process itself. Yes, although you see, here too it seems, we cannot only blame our companies. In principle, the state could find opportunities, well, preferences, subsidies, incentives. And it is generally stated by the bank itself that governments should also help solve this problem. So look, we know that in eastern Siberia there is a serious state task, the gasification of energy. On one hand, we burn gas, and we burn gas that can be used as fuel. Yes, that is methane, while valuable, heavier fractions that are extracted can be used for oil and gas chemistry. So we are burning what? We should, yes, we should. For example, we have long said that Krasnoyarsk needs to be gasified, as well as other large cities in Siberia. And secondly, under current conditions, China is probably the main market for all hydrocarbons, not Europe. And China is right next to eastern Siberia. Now is the time to add some state support, so we don't see the ever-growing flares over Taimyr and the Krasnoyarsk region, but instead solve the modern problem. Last time we noted that the increase in flaring was largely associated with the cessation of exports of liquefied gases produced from associated petroleum gas and their oversupply in the domestic market, with factories being fully loaded. As a result, enterprises sought additional rights to burn. Over the year, I understand that the problem remains acute, but are there any approaches to solving it? Last time, you very pertinently mentioned that the Russian Federation should consider expanding the conversion of Russian vehicles to liquefied carbon gases. Is there any progress here? Any experience?
Ну, какой-то общий такой
I
набор
don't
мы
have
пока
any
еще наблюдаем,
comprehensive
но в любом
analysis, of
случае
course,
эта тема
but in any
более
case,
чем
this topic is
актуальна. И
more
она,
than
знаете,
relevant, and it
как-то
actually has some development.
имеет
At least
определенное
I can
развитие. По
judge
крайней
by
мере, можно
large
судить по
mining companies
крупным
that are now
добывающим
really
компаниям, которые
converting
сейчас
their
реально
large quarry
добиваются
transport, dump
большой
trucks, to gas
карьерный
motor
уклад, я бы
fuel.
сказал, да, на газомоторное топливо. То есть это доказывает, что, собственно,
This
и
proves that in the
в
regions we are
регионах, там,
talking
на
about,
западе
in eastern
Лайберии, Южной
Siberia,
Сибири,
there
есть
is a
определенный
market for
избыток.
it.
Но
But
как-то
I
такой
can't say there's
полноценной
a
картины
complete
нет. Я думаю,
picture.
что в целом
I think
эта
overall
перспектива
there is
есть, но она,
potential,
конечно, не
but
решит
it certainly
проблему
won't solve the problem of load
условной
waves.
загрузки. Да, конечно,
Yes, of
тут
course.
надо не забывать,
We
что
must not forget
есть
that there
колоссальные
are
возможности
colossal
нефти и газохимии.
opportunities in
Давайте
petrochemistry.
вспомним, что у
Let's
нас,
remember that
собственно,
our
после газохимии уже
petrochemistry has
сейчас
already
влияет
moved
и
from
Западная
Western
Сибирь, тоже пострадала,
Siberia to the Far
на Дальний
East.
Восток. Мы знаем про
We know about
новый
the new
проект
project with our Chinese
совместно
partners
с
in the AMA
нашими
region.
китайскими партнерами
So, in
по
fact,
Амурской
such
области. То есть, на
serious
самом деле,
capacities are being built
такие
beyond the
серьезные мощности
Urals, far
строятся
towards the
и
Far
за
East.
Уралом, далеко в сторону Дальнего Востока. Что касается
As for the
перспектив
prospects of supplying liquefied
поставок
gases to
судов
China, they probably
в Китай,
exist. But I don't think
они, наверное,
it's a
есть,
very
но я не
broad
думаю,
market.
что
Yes, because
крупнейший
there was an
сектор
attempt
газа.
at one
Была
time in the
попытка в свое
Primorsky
время
Krai to
в
build
Приморском
a
крае
terminal
построить
specifically for
терминал именно
liquefied
под суды.
gases.
Это
That was about
реализация
10
не
years
так, она
ago, but
и
it didn't go far.
замедлена. То есть
So
здесь
either
все-таки
the economics
доли
or
экономики
something else is
действительно не
lacking for its
хватает для реализации.
implementation. If we return to the World Bank report, what are the best practices observed on a global scale that the World Bank recommends for various countries to implement to reduce the severity of the problems?
Да, ну вообще
Yes,
Всемирный
well,
банк, он не
the
только
World Bank not only
проводит
conducts such
глобальные
global
мониторинги, и вообще
monitoring,
большое спасибо,
for
на
which
самом
we
деле
are very
мониторинг — это
grateful,
начало
because
решения
monitoring
проблемы.
is
Потому
the
что когда ты
beginning of
знаешь
solving the problem.
объективно
Because when you
проблему, ты
objectively know
начинаешь
the problem, you begin to
качественно
understand that
ее
you need
решать.
to solve it.
Объективный контроль в
Objective
космосе,
control from
который с
space, which
помощью
is
World
now
Bank сейчас
organized with the
организован для
help
того,
of the
чтобы
World
высокую
Bank,
точность
because of the
измерений,
high
он
accuracy of
позволяет четко
measurements,
понимать,
allows us to
кто
really
является героем,
understand
кто
who is
сопровождает,
who
вплоть до
burns how
локализации
much,
каждого
right down to the
факела.
localization of each
Всемирный банк
flare.
своим таким
In
подходом,
addition to
он,
such
естественно,
monitoring,
оказывает
the
и
World Bank naturally
конституционную
provides
помощь, и
constitutional and
финансовую.
financial
Есть
assistance.
примеры, когда, например,
There are
правый
examples when, for
Узбекистан
instance,
был
in the
вынужден
Republic of
финансирование получить
Uzbekistan,
Всемирного банка, и
funding was
они
allocated
смогли
by the
реализовать
political
свой
bank, and they were able to
централизованный
build an
систему,
additional
чтобы
directed
решать проблему
system to
утилизации.
solve the
Это
utilization
по линии
problem.
вот как
This
бы
is along the
помощи
lines of the
World Bank.
World Bank's
Но на
assistance.
самом деле
But
я
in
хочу
fact,
привести
I
еще
want
один
to give
пример
another
нашего
example
непосредственного
of our immediate
соседа
neighbor, Kazakhstan.
Казахстан.
This republic is
Республика на
actually
самом деле
showing
показывает
phenomenal
просто
success.
феноменальные успехи. И вот как бы, к
And
сожалению, наша
unfortunately,
с вами
our
страна
country,
вот
due to
все
various
больше устойчиво
conditions,
движется
is now moving in the
в
wrong
неправильном направлении,
direction.
говоря о
Speaking of
высокотемпературных
burning
газах, и это
associated gas,
показывает
while Kazakhstan is showing
обратную
the
трend.
opposite
Во-первых,
trend.
вот
Well,
за
firstly, over 13
15
years,
лет, там, с
from
12 года, если
2012 to
точно говорить, Всемирный банк
2025,
до
according to the
25-го,
most
почти
accurate
в 2
measurements of
раза
the World Bank,
сокращены
the
объемы
volumes of
сжигания.
burning have been almost
А что
halved.
может еще
And
более
what may
важно,
be even more
по
important,
удельным показателям, по
in terms of
интенсивности, как мы говорим,
specific
да, то есть
indicators, in terms of
количество
intensity,
сожженного
as we
СО2
say, the amount of
единицу
associated
добытой
gas
воды,
burned
они
per
практически
unit
сейчас одни из
extracted.
лидеров в мире.
They are now among the
Вот
world
Соединенные Штаты Америки
leaders.
очень хорошо
The
знают.
United States of
Саудовская Аравия
America
и
has very
Казахстан.
good
У
indicators,
нас показатель
Saudi Arabia and
сравнительно в 3 раза
Kazakhstan.
примерно хуже,
Our
чем в
indicator, for
Казахстане.
comparison,
Почему
is
это
about 3
сделано?
times worse than in
Одна из
Kazakhstan.
причин
Why was this
все-таки,
done?
во-первых,
One of the
явно
reasons is
обычный
that,
газ
firstly,
является одним
associated
из
natural
приоритетов
gas is clearly one of
на
the
уровне
priorities
государства.
at the
Но
state
единственное, к
level,
сожалению,
which
у нас это было,
unfortunately cannot be
и
said for
согласно
us.
было
We
специальное
had
решение
it.
президента
About 15 years
в,
ago,
если не
there was a
ошибаюсь, в 2007
special
году
presidential
частное
directive,
собственное.
if I'm not
Так вот, у них
mistaken,
это
in
приоритет было
2008.
раз.
Now
У
it has
них
faded
очень
away.
жесткое
So for
регулирование
them,
и очень
it
жесткие
is
санкции. Я могу
priority
в
number
качестве примера
one.
привести.
They have very
Вот
strict
недавно
regulation and very
большой
strict
консорциум
sanctions. I
северо-каспийских
can give an
нефтяных компаний,
example.
которые
Just
разрабатывают программу
recently, the large
каспийского
consortium of the
моря,
North
была
Caspian
оштрафована
Operating
каспийским
Company,
регулятором
which is developing
почти на $7
Kashagan in the
миллионов
Caspian
за
Sea,
всех
was
нарушений
fined by their
экологических
regulator
правил.
almost
У нас
$7
вот
million
слышали какие-нибудь
for excessive
такие примеры,
flaring of
когда
associated
наш
gas.
регулятор
Have we
штрафует
heard of any
крупного
such
трубопровода?
examples
Либо
where our
замораживает, а
regulator
скорее всего,
fines for
штрафует.
flaring
Кстати, например,
associated
сейчас
gas?
есть, так сказать,
Either it is is hushed up, or most likely no one is fined because, again, there is a need to forgive such violations.
Алексей, хотелось бы услышать еще ваше мнение значит, проекте «Нулевое
Alexey
рутинное
Ivanovich,
испытание
I would like to hear
природного
your opinion on the project of
природного
zero
газа
routine
где-то
flaring of
2030 году.
associated
Что
gas
можете
by
сказать вообще об этом?
2030.
Это как-то у нас
What can you
будет
say
влиять?
about this? Can this be implemented? This ambitious program, which was launched about 10 years ago, certainly inspired more confidence back then because the horizon was still until 2030. Now, as we approach 2030, we understand that it is practically impossible. The World Bank says that to achieve this, flaring must be reduced by 40% each year. Well, unfortunately, this is simply unrealistic. In fact, the initiative still exists. It has been supported by about 35 countries, including Russia. It has been supported by about 60 of the largest companies. From Russia, only 2 companies joined, but nevertheless, all the largest companies in the world supported it, and many development banks. So, in principle, it is a powerful conglomerate of states, private businesses, and financiers to achieve these results. On one hand, a number of participants in this initiative, a number of countries and companies show positive results, but not all, so the success of this initiative is ambiguous.
Позитив.
It primarily depends on the national initiative, as far as I understand, in following the standards of this program.
Инициативы, насколько я понял, в следовании
Well, yes, 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 yes. I think that now the main
Possible
message
это
may even be at the national level, because, well, any country can now declare itself a leader if it finds a solution. The same example of Kazakhstan, I think, should be the closest to us. I don't particularly see environmental organizations paying as much attention to this problem as to others. Now, as it were, every second person is dealing with either microplastic problems or climate change issues. But in terms of climate change, how? Everyone loves, for example, sharp climate programs. Let's plant a forest, it will sequester carbon dioxide. This is partly true, but when you have a field nearby where associated gas is being burned, let's first allocate money there, not for planting forests.
Давайте сначала
Мгм, мгм.
дадим деньги туда, а не на посадку леса.
Stop the emissions, and then it will be easier for us to, so to speak, mitigate the remnants. So, summing up our conversation, it is necessary to raise the priority level of the problem of flaring associated gas in some environmental context. Absolutely. Thank you.